Session 7 is all about trans-esophageal 3D or contrast echocardiography safety of patients, and this session is sponsored by the unrestricted academic grant from GE Healthcare. So before we go direct to the session, can we have the Can we have the AV?
If it's not ready, you can call the chairman by the time.
Okay. May I please request the esteemed chairperson, Dr. Monotosh Panda, Dr. Vishwakesh Mojumdar, Dr. V.P. Chattopadhyay, Dr. Kashinath Ghosh Hazira,
Healthcare professionals are facing unprecedented pressure. GE Healthcare continues to build on decades of innovation. To help empower your care teams and support your vital work, we have raised the performance of our Vivid systems even higher. Vivid Ultra Edition. Introducing the latest in AI-based technology to help reduce tedious tasks, lower inter-operator variability, and improve workflow efficiency. Diagnose more confidently and accelerate exams with automated recognition and measurements. Vivid Ultra Edition is elevated by you. Your time is precious. Make every moment count. See problems clearly and quickly. Perform procedures with great precision. Semi-automated detection of appropriate spectral Doppler measurements provides a fast-forward path from scanning to measurements. Powered by AI, elevated by you. GE Healthcare.
Thank you for the AV. Now, may I please request again few of the chairpersons who have already joined. Thank you for that. And may I please request the rest of you to join the session so that we can start shortly. Mr. Alok Mojumdar, Dr. Bikash Bhattacharya, Dr. Saroj Monbur, Dr. V.P. I request you all to kindly join the session. And this session is all about trans-esophageal 3D or contrast echocardiography safety of patients. And the first speaker for this session will be Dr. R. Alagation, and he will present his case, clinical cases where 3D echo saved the day. Requesting all the respective chairpersons and the speakers again to kindly respect to the allotted time so that the time for discussion is not cut.
So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my proud privilege to introduce my old friend, Dr. Alagation. He is one of the pioneers for development of echocardiography in India. And he is my old friend. Dr. Alagation will present few interesting cases with the help of 3D to save the time and save the day. And ultimately, 3D is long-term goal of echocardiography. So therefore, interesting case represent Dr. Elegazan, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for inviting me to give this talk on use of three-dimensional echocardiography. There are three areas in which the three-dimensional echocardiography is extremely useful. One is in the analysis of the anatomy of the mitral valve. And we are going to show some cases of mitral valve disease and aortic valve disease in which it has made all the difference. The mitral valve disease is classified into the different types of type 1, 2, 3 by Carpentier. And also the mitral valve complex can be divided into anterior and the posterior mitral leaflet, which again is divided into various scallops, A1, A2, A3, and P1, P2, P3. The posterior leaflet is divided by deep fissures into these three scallops. The one which is opposite to the posterior scallops is the anterior scallop. There is no division in the anterior mitral leaflet. So this division, the involvement of the scallops is has to be identified clearly for anatomical and surgical purposes. So this is the first case of a severe mitral regurgitation. You can see the parasternal long axis view shows severe mitral regurgitation, and there is a prolapse of the anterior mitral leaflet. There is a large prolapse of the anterior mitral leaflet. And this is the second view in which you can see the mitral regurgitation. It is from the middle, and the direction of the jet is not clearly visualized. And in the apical four-chamber view, you can clearly visualize that the jet is moving towards the lateral wall and posteriorly due to a large anterior mitral leaflet prolapse. From the transthoracic images, we can see to a certain extent that is the anterior mitral leaflet which is involved, and the A2 scallop is the one which is probably mostly involved. And we have this complicated diagram from the transesophageal echo, from which we can identify which are the scallops which are involved. I don't follow this diagram, I follow this one, where in the 0 degrees, you can insert the probe from superiorly to inferiorly and go through A1, P1 first, A2, P2 second, and A3, P3. This is one way of identifying which are the scallops which are involved. And then in the bicommissural view, we can tilt the transducer anteriorly or posteriorly or through the middle, and we can find out the scallops as shown in the diagram. So we use this one for the identification of the scallops. Here in the 0 degrees, you can see clearly this is the A2 scallop, which is showing the marked prolapse. The posterior mitral leaflet is normal. In the 60 degrees, you can see this is the A2 scallop and this is the A3 scallop. So there is a big prolapse of the A2 scallop, and probably there is an involvement of the A3 scallop also. The other, in the other angles, the mitral valve looks normal in this view. The 130 degrees, you can see the marked prolapse of the A2 scallop. And this is the three-dimensional echocardiogram by transthoracic echo. This is the transthoracic echo. You can see a large prolapse of the anterior mitral leaflet involving the middle portion. Here again, we are not able to clearly see whether the A3 is involved or not. But in the transesophageal echo, you can clearly see this is the A2 scallop and this is the A3 scallop. Both scallops are involved in the prolapse process. And this is the second patient where we can see the posterior leaflet. Before that, say from this transesophageal echocardiographic views, we can actually mark out the say annulus, and also we can mark out the leaflets and the leaflet closure line, and we can actually get a parametric image of the anterior and the posterior mitral leaflet and the annulus. And this is the normal parametric image of the mitral valve obtained from the transesophageal three-dimensional echocardiogram. So, and this is the image of the of this patient who had a large anterior mitral leaflet prolapse. So from this, we can actually measure the say the circumference of the mitral annulus. We can measure the diameters of the mitral annulus. we can see which portion of the mitral valve is prolapsing, and the area, height of the prolapse, etc., can be measured from the 3-dimensional echocardiogram. This is a second patient in which there is a marked prolapse of the posterior mitral leaflet. You can see the posterior leaflet is prolapsing, and it is also flail. The anterior mitral leaflet is normal, and you can clearly see that there is a small circumflex prolapse involving the posterior mitral leaflet, and it involves only the middle portion of the posterior leaflet. This is a typical P2 prolapse with a caudal rupture and a flail posterior mitral leaflets. So 3-dimensional echocardiogram immediately gives you whether the anterior mitral leaflet is involved, posterior mitral leaflet is involved, which scallops are involved. So all this information can be obtained. Apart from the anatomy, we can actually go through the vena contracta region of the mitral regurgitation jet with the 3-dimensional echocardiogram, and we can measure the area of the mitral regurgitation and assess the severity of the mitral regurgitation. When we see like that, it has been found that most of the mitral regurgitation jet areas are oval or irregular. Sometimes there are multiple jets, multiple mitral regurgitation jets. In all the things, the area of the vena contracta gives you an accurate measurement of the severity of mitral regurgitation. Here you can see in the second case, it was a localized involvement of the posterior mitral leaflet. What we have to do is just a resection of the flail segment and repair of the posterior mitral leaflet with putting an annular ring will solve the mitral regurgitation. So a simple mitral valve repair you can do when there is only 1 or 2 scallop involvement. If it is involving the posterior mitral leaflet, if there is an increase in the leaflet tissue with no calcification, when the prolapse height is less and the annulus is not much dilated. When these conditions are present, the mitral valve repair is going to be simple, and it can be done by any good thoracic surgeon. When there is a multi-segment involvement, anterior and both ports of mitral leaflet prolapse, scarcity of the leaflet tissue and severe calcification, when the prolapsing height is more and the annulus is dilated more than 50 millimeters, then in this patient, the mitral valve repair is going to be a complex one, and this patient will be has to be done by a mitral valve surgeon who does at least 100 cases per year of mitral valve repair. So this again shows how the diameters are measured, how we can measure the height of the prolapse and also the area of the prolapse, etc. This can be measured from the 3-dimensional echocardiogram. Apart from the indicators for the mitral valve repair, we can also predict which patient is going to develop a systemic anterior motion of the mitral valve after repair. This is from the annulus of the non-planarity angle. That is the mitral annulus itself. One side is higher, another side is also higher. We can measure this non-polarity angle, and if it is more, then the patient may develop a SAM. The mitral aortic angle, and also if the patient has got an increased leaflet area and the displacement of the coaptation line, if these conditions are present, that patient may develop a SAM after a mitral valve repair. See, in mitral stenosis, we can actually, it is very useful for puncturing the atrial septum, and also we can position the mitral valve balloon in the correct position, and then we can do a balloon mitral valvotomy. So this is how a balloon mitral valvotomy done during the during the procedure. The 3-dimensional echocardiogram shows beautifully the inflated balloon and the mitral valvotomy. And this is another patient in whom there is a mitral regurgitation. So this patient has got a mitral regurgitation due to a non-coaptation of the anterior and the posterior mitral leaflet. There is a marked tenting of the anterior and the posterior mitral leaflets, which is produced a type 3 mitral regurgitation. So this patient usually are suitable for a mitral valve clip. And for this, a 3-dimensional echocardiogram is extremely useful. You can clearly show where the mitral regurgitation is occurring. And this one shows again the mitral regurgitation in the 2D and also in the 3-dimensional echocardiogram. And this is the mitral clip, which is placed across the anterior and the posterior mitral leaflets. And with a 3-dimensional echocardiogram, you can clearly make out again the mitral regurgitation. And here you can see after clipping, the mitral regurgitation has markedly reduced. There are two small jets of mitral regurgitation. The mitral clip has to be placed exactly perpendicular to the mitral annulus, and it should be in the area where there is a maximum mitral regurgitation. So this guidance can be obtained excellently by the three-dimensional echocardiogram. So for placing the mitral clip across the mitral valve, the three-dimensional echocardiography is very useful. So a 3D echo is excellent for analyzing the anatomy of the mitral valve, finding out the severity of the mitral valve from the vena contracta area, and also for guiding the mitral regurgitation repair by using the mitral clip. Thank you.
Nice lecture, Dr. Ramaswamy. I'm a cardiologist, Dr. Hajra here. You have omitted one important applications of 3D nowadays in LA appendage closure, where you can nicely see the LA ostium. It is no more an oval thing, it's elliptical thing, and you can choose the right device size depending on the 3D echo. And all the people who are listening, those who are not familiar with the 3D, the aorta goes up on the surgical view. The appendage, which is usually seen on the right side of the screen, goes to the left side of the screen, and the counting starts from the appendage, P1, P2, P3. It's very, very important to recognize A1, A2, A3, and nicely has demonstrated. It's very useful in mitral clipping, whether you use Pascal or any other device, paravalvular leaks, TMVR, LA closure, mitral stenosis. Very nice lecture, sir. Thank you. Panja, you are unmute, sir. You have to unmute yourself. Unmute, sir. Unmute. Dr. Panja, unmute.
Okay, Doctor. Another question regarding the aortic valve, the particularly percutaneous aortic valve replacement. Definitely, Dr. Hajar point out the paravalvular leak is very important with the help of the TD. Another, the coronary height, the height of origin of the coronary up to the aortic annulus. This is very also important. So nicely presented in a nice way. So it is very useful for upgradation knowledge. Dr. Hajra, anything? Dr. Kasinath Hajra? Any question for clarification?
Unmute. Kasinath, unmute.
Next speaker, please.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So my old friend, always gold, Dr. Allegations for excellent presentation.
Thank you.
I think next speaker, and Dr. Monish Bansal. So Monish Bansal from Delhi, and he will speak on 3D on the particularly peri-operative procedure. Dr. Bansal, please.
Okay. Muted. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to show a case of structural heart disease intervention in which TE played a very important role. In fact, 3D TE saved the day for us. So we all know paravalvular leak is a common complication in patients who have undergone valve replacement surgery earlier. It can occur in up to 10% patients after mitral valve replacement, and it's known to occur in up to 5% patients after aortic valve replacement. Incidence is much higher after TAVR. The patients who develop significant PVL and become symptomatic because of that, they present either with hemolysis resulting in significant anemia or congestive heart failure due to volume overload plus anemia. And in these patients, it becomes important to close these defects. Now, although reoperation is one of the options in these patients, this is obviously not the preferred choice. First, because the surgery is going to be very high risk. And secondly, it is also quite mentally traumatic for the patient and the patient family to undergo another cardiac surgery soon after the first one. And therefore, most of the PVLs are closed percutaneously. Now, TE plays a very, very important role in the evaluation of these patients, in planning the procedure and actual conduct of the procedure. Before the procedure, we have to use TE to define the defects in great detail. We have to make out how many defects are there, where they are located, what is the size, shape, hemodynamic effect, how is the PHV function, and if there are any other cardiac abnormalities which need to be taken care of. And during procedure, it is entirely dependent on TE to facilitate the closure procedure. The reason why TE is so important is because under fluoroscopy, we cannot see the defect. And in fact, there are no anatomic landmarks also except for the prosthetic valve ring, which can be seen. But then it becomes very, very difficult to localize the defect around the prosthetic valve and navigating through it. And therefore, TE becomes very important. Earlier, we've been doing these procedures under 2D TE guidance, but now with the availability of 3D TE, it's become much easier. Since TE plays a very, very important role here, both the interventionist and echocardiographer, they need to be very familiar with the echo anatomic fluoroscopic orientation. They must understand each other's language very well, and they should be able to communicate effectively during the procedure. And therefore, various schemes have been proposed how to name the various positions around the prosthetic valve leak that both the interventionists and echocardiographers can easily make out. So here is my patient. This was a 43 years old gentleman. He had undergone mitral valve replacement in 2016, received a tilting disc valve. 2 years later, he presented with significant dyspnea on exertion. He was found to have anemia, which was hemolytic anemia. And he had some volume overload also. So it was decided to close the defect. These are his TE images, 2D TE. So this first image here is mid-esophageal 4-chamber view at 0 degree. We can see a small defect here, very close to the septum. If we view this valve from the left atrium, it will be somewhere around 3 o'clock position. Then we tilt the imaging plane to 34 degree, 35. We see a defect here. And in 74 degree, again, we see a defect here. So from these images, it becomes very difficult to make out where this defect actually is. We know that it is close to the septum, but where exactly? And also whether there is one defect or more than one defect. But 3D TE makes it very easy. This is a view of the valve from the left atrium side. So here is left atrial appendage. Here would be aortic valve. And this is the interatrial septum, sorry. And this is the PHV ring. So we can clearly see there are two defects. One is here, which is resulting in a bigger jet, and there is a smaller jet here. So this defect, which is close to is in the range of in the region of around 2 o'clock, this seems to be the first target for closure. On measuring the size, it was roughly 5 millimeter in size. So it was decided to close this defect percutaneously, and septal puncture was done. We can again the same view. This is the ring, here is the defect, and this is the interatrial septum. This guide sheet has been introduced from right side into the left atrium. Now here in this defect is here, guide sheet is here. If we advance the wire is going to go in this direction towards the lateral wall. We have to bring it towards this defect. So that is going to be challenging. So we thought that let us advance this wire towards the lateral wall of the left atrium, make a loop and bring it back towards the defect. So like this. Here is the defect. This is the guide sheet. We advance it, make a loop, bring it here. So this is something which could be done. But after that, the next goal was to turn the tip in such a direction that it enters into the defect and crosses towards the left ventricle. But in spite of lot of efforts, this could not be done. For almost 1 hour, interventionists kept trying, but this wire did not turn towards this direction, and we were not able to cross the defect. So the only other option in this situation was to withdraw this sheath very close to the interatrial septum and flex it downwards here and orient it like this in this direction. But the interventionist was quite hesitant in doing this, because if we withdraw the sheath that close to the septum, there is always a risk of coming back into the right atrium, which results in a lot of procedure being repeated. So then we decided, okay, let us do it in the real-time 3D guidance. So this is what we did. The interventionist withdrew the sheath gradually, and it was done, and it was monitored by 3DT. Once it came very close to the septum, it was flexed down, and now we can see that it is pointing towards the defect. This is another view showing the same thing. Another view, we can see that now the sheath is pointing directly above the mouth of the defect. This is on 2D. Once this was done, it was easy to cross this defect. We can see here, the wire has been passed through the defect and the catheter has been advanced. Same thing can be seen on 3D also, and we can make sure by 3D that it is passing through the defect, not through the valve. Once this was done, then the catheter was advanced further and the vascular plug device was advanced. It was deployed there and released. This is the final picture after completion of the procedure. Once the procedure is completed, we have to check this again in 3D. We can see the plug here, nicely closing this defect. On color, we can see the second PVL, but there's no color regurgitation here from this defect. And we have to also ensure that there is no impingement on the valve leaflet by this device. So there was none, there was no interference with the valve function. Here is the plug. This is the valve leaflet. And this is from the LV side. We can very clearly see this LV disc of the defect, which is very close to the leaflet. So this is how we were able to do this very complex procedure successfully, only because of the availability of 3DT during the procedure. Thank you.
Very nice talk, Manish. It's very helpful for us to have a confident 3DT or 4DT player. Those who are watching his presentations remember certain things. The puncture of septum is very important. For example, in his case, the posterior inferior is the ideal side for going laterally. On the 4DT or the 3DT, you see the appendage on your left side, whereas the aorta is on the top. Now, those who are doing angiogram or like AAI, the image intensifier goes towards the scalp in 0° T, and it goes towards the right shoulder in 45° T. It goes towards the liver in 90° T, and goes towards the groin in 135° T. So if you really want to correlate 135° T with your image intensifier, the image intensifier should look at the groin. But definitely we are learning a lot from you people, guiding us to do the things safely and effectively. And definitely the youngsters should learn 3DT. Very nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Bansal, how will decide the size of the paravalvular leak as a whole?
Sir, it depends on the shape also. If it is a circular defect, like in this case, we just measure one diameter, which is sufficient. But very often it is oblong defect, and there we have to measure the width as well as length of the defect. And in such cases, often 2 plugs are required on both ends to close the defect.
Yes, and the size of the length of the vascular plaque also decided by the 3D. Very useful to us. Yeah. Oh. Okay, thank you very much for excellent presentation. Dr. Haj. Okay.
Sir, then before going to the next case, one small request. The faculties who are wanted to questions to the speaker, first take the chairman of this particular session, because that should be the protocol.
Sure. Any other chairperson here? Dr. Vishwakarma Majumdar, Saroj Mandal?
No, sir, you go and continue. But I am telling the other faculty.
No, whether other people available or not, we cannot understand. You have to say whether they are available or not.
Sir, I think Dr. Kasinath Ghosh Hajra is available.
Dr. Hajra. Dr. Hajra, please they call the next speaker and introduce him. Dr. Hajra?
Okay, sir.
Okay. Now, the next speaker, the Somir Srivastava, where he is the important and the dynamic echocardiographer in our country. He is from Delhi, and he'll talk in the utility 3D in that is the critically ventilated patients, mechanically ventilated patient, how much is useful. Yes, Dr. Srivastava, please.
Sir, there is an announcement in the morning. Dr. Srivastav's one of his very near kin is down with COVID, so he will not be able to attend. So can you go to the next speaker, sir?
Okay, I think our friend Dr. Roxy from UK, he is very important. He is our very close friend for a long time, from our student time. And he will speak the utility of contrast echo in acutely ill patient after myocardial infarction. Dr. Roxy, and he is very, very interested in the non-invasive cardiology, enough publications in international journal, and he is very useful for the development of echocardiography in the world. Dr. Roxy, please.
Thank you,
yes,
Professor Panja Monotosh, for this very kind introduction. And I'm always very honored to be invited to these meetings anywhere in India, particularly in Calcutta, because that's where I grew up, that's where I trained.
Welcome you.
So, all right, so let me share the screen. Now, this I'm doing for the first, okay, there we are.
Yeah.
Okay, you can all see the screen?
Yes, sir. You're audible and visible.
Right.
Okay, thank you very much. So this is a case of a patient presenting with acute myocardial infarction. So let's go to the case straight away. So it's a 53-year-old male, doesn't have much cardiovascular risk factors, but presented with sudden onset chest pain lasting for more than 1 hour. And on the ECG, there was inferolateral ST depression. The troponins were significantly raised. And the patient was unwell and slightly hypotensive. And the patient was treated for acute coronary syndrome. And with some fluids to get the blood pressure up. And this is the echo, apical 4-chamber view. You can immediately see that the LV is not normal. And there is a akinetic area affecting the mid-septum apex and part of the apicolateral wall. And the ejection fraction was 45%. Anyway, the most important thing is to look at the coronary artery, because the patient presented with acute coronary syndrome, and it's a echo was quickly done as the patient came in, the next day. And then the patient had the angiography done straight away. So that's the angiography. I'm just showing the relevant view. So this is one view. And I'm sure you'll all appreciate that the LAD, LAD appears smooth, but there is sucking or rather compression of the mid portion of the LAD, which becomes smaller during systole and then dilates in diastole. So this is a typical myocardial bridging. And just to talk a bit more about myocardial bridging, this is characterized by intramyocardial root of a segment of one of the major coronary arteries. Usually it is asymptomatic and is a benign phenomena. However, in severe cases, there could be reduction in systolic flow, but not only systolic flow, there's also reduction in diastolic flow, and that is the reason why the patient may present with chest pain due to ischemia. So it's not only in systolic flow, the blood, not only during systole, the blood flow goes down, but also there is an impaired relaxation of the coronary artery, resulting in reduced diastolic flow. Now, because of this continued compression, it may provoke atherosclerosis, especially at the proximal part of the bridging. And the patient may present with acute coronary syndrome because bits and pieces can fly off from the atherosclerotic lesions, and the patient can present as this patient did. And they can also present with significant arrhythmias, and they may even present with rarely with sudden death. So though it's a generally benign condition, but complications can occur. So now the question for this patient now is, he's got a huge area of wall motion abnormality, whether that risk area is viable. Because if it is dead, then of course, we don't need to do anything. But if it is viable, then we have to move to the next stage. So in this particular case, because the patient was even hypotensive the next day, despite the fluid, a bedside technique is ideal. Now, the bedside technique is echocardiography, but giving dobutamine, even if it is low dose to assess viable myocardium, there's a risk of tachycardia. And as I've just described, if the heart rate goes up, then there would be more episodes of ischemia, and that could be detrimental to this patient who is already hypotensive. So the only technique that we can do at the bedside would be myocardial contrast echo. So the question is, how can myocardial contrast echo detect myocardial viability? Now, if you look at this image, so this patient, this is an echo of another patient where we've injected contrast, a steady state is reached. And when a steady state is reached, if you look at the signal intensity from the myocardium, for example, the septum, that correlates with, that depicts relative capillary blood volume. Now, capillary blood volume correlates with myocyte integrity. So if there is capillary volume, if there's capillary present there, if there's capillary blood flow, then the myocardium is alive because it is only going to supply a live tissue. Now, if the myocardium is dead, then the capillaries will collapse. So you will not see any, so you will not see any signal intensity here, which represents capillary volume. Now, with this, you can also look at blood velocity. For example, you can get rid of those microbubbles with a flash, transient increase in the mechanical index, and you can see it filling back. And you can see in this particular example, the LV is dilated and severely hypokinetic, but there's a lot of myocardial blood flow. So this is a viable myocardium as far as this particular patient is concerned, which is not the patient that I'm talking about. So what does it mean? So this is a study that we did to see what does his capillary blood volume suggest, as I've described. And so this is an example of another patient who came in with a transmural infarction, and you can see the anterior wall is black, meaning there's no capillaries here. That's why there's no signal intensity. And this correlates with transmural uptake of the gadolinium on MRI. So that correlates with the transmurality of infarction. The greater the reduction of capillary volume or signal intensity, the greater the chance of this patient having a transmural infarction. And this is shown with this flash replenishment imaging. And this, so this is looking at the velocity, and this is looking at the peak capillary volume. And you can see the capillary volume is markedly reduced compared to the opposite territory in the inferior wall, where the capillary volume is 5 times more than this. And so this is markedly reduced, and the blood flow is also markedly reduced in this infarcted area. Now, what does this translate into? So you can see on the right side, this is again looking at outcome from one of our studies. And you can see that if the contrast defect index is very high, meaning there's a lot of contrast defect index, like in this case, the outcome of this patient is poor compared to another group where there's good contrast uptake, like in the inferior wall, there the outcome is very good. So myocardial viability based on myocardial contrast echo not only tells you there is viability and no viability, but it translates into outcome. So if you look at this example of another patient who's got a huge area of wall motion abnormality, and this is looking at a myocardial contrast echo, the flash replenishment imaging, and you can see there's a large area of perfusion defect, or rather contrast defect here, which suggests that this area is non-viable and the outcome is bad. Now, what about the present patient? So this is looking at flash replenishment imaging of the same patient of ours with the wall motion abnormality of the apex. And now if you look at this, this is a flash, and you can see the microbubbles now where it's going. It's coming into the myocardium, and despite a large area of wall motion abnormality, there's relatively good perfusion, meaning this is all, and this is another view, looking at two-chamber view, and you can again see the same phenomena. You can see a lot of contrast in that area where there is a huge amount of wall motion abnormality. So on the basis of this, just a resting echo, we've clarified that this patient, despite an infarction, has got a lot of myocardial viability. So the next question is, if the patient's got a lot of myocardial viability and the patients came in with acute coronary syndrome with this myocardial bridging, whether that myocardial bridging is actually causing any ischemia. Because if it's ischemic with viable myocardium, then this patient will benefit from intervention, or rather, dealing with this myocardial bridging phenomena. So the next thing is to do a stress echo, which was done. So this is the stress echo of this patient. And what you can see here is on the left is the 4-chamber view, on the right is the 2-chamber view, rest and stress, and the bottom is the 3-chamber view, rest and stress. And you can appreciate during stress, the LV dilates, the apicoseptal area and the anterolateral and the anterior area dilates also, which suggests that this patient has got ischemia because there's reversible myocardial dysfunction. Now, if the patient has got ischemia, the only way to deal with this is now to deal with the myocardial bridging. So how will you deal with myocardial bridging? You can put in a stent, or you can do a bypass. Now, the problem with stenting is it is very uncertain how the stent is going to behave in this myocardial bridge. We have a lot of interventionalists in this group, and we may talk about that, but as far as our interventional group is concerned in our hospital, we were very skeptical of putting in a stent because, the stent may disrupt, the stent may be displaced because of the myocardial bridging. And really going down the route of coronary artery bypass grafting is also something that is of uncertain benefit in these patients. So we are treading on some unknown water here. Now, but what we didn't look at is, okay, what's happening with the perfusion? Now, is it important to look at perfusion? So during stress. So what does perfusion do during stress? So now, if you look at this video intensity curve here, time intensity curve, you will see, and this is an example of patients who underwent stress echo and looking at myocardial contrast uptake, you can see if there is no stenosis, the myocardium fills up very quickly and the capillary volume is intact. When there is stenosis, the blood velocity drops, the capillary volume becomes less, and the more the stenosis, the lesser the capillary volume, meaning is a transient reduction in capillary volume. So I'll show you an example of how it looks when the patient has a normal stress perfusion. So this is a patient undergoing stress, and there's a flash coming up, and you can see it fills up very well from endocardium to epicardium simultaneously, suggesting that there is no perfusion defect there. And that's a normal perfusion during stress because it fills up almost immediately. Now, the other example is where the patient has got coronary stenosis. See how it fills with coronary stenosis. See, immediately after flash, you can see there's a subendocardial defect in the septum, transmural defect in the anterolateral wall and the apex, and see how slowly it fills. The septum fills first and then the anterolateral region. In fact, this patient has got multivessel disease, where the disease in the LAD is less compared to the disease in the non-LAD area because of the way it fills. So this is how it looks with perfusion defect during stress. So what about our patient here who had reversible myocardial dysfunction? And so look at perfusion here. So here's the flash replenishment imaging, flash coming up. And you can appreciate that it fills almost simultaneously everywhere. And this is the 2-chamber view. Looking at it again. And again, you see the same filling. So in this patient, there is no ischemia, though there is reversible myocardial dysfunction. So the myocardial function deteriorated, and regionally, but there is no perfusion defect. So what I told my interventionist is this patient does not have myocardial ischemia, and the presentation of ACS is not because of myocardial bridging, but this patient has got Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. And why Takotsubo? Because first of all, at rest, despite wall motion abnormality, there was good perfusion, and on stress, the perfusion remains. And so this patient did not undergo any intervention, and the patient went home and is doing very well. And so just to tell you that this is our series of patients that we looked into, reversible exercise-induced left ventricular dysfunction in symptomatic patients with Takotsubo syndrome. 66% of patients with symptomatic Takotsubo syndrome showed reversible or apical global myocardial dysfunction during stress echo. And we know that in Takotsubo syndrome, the problem is the myocardium, not perfusion. So the perfusion remains normal. And so for this particular case, contrast perfusion saved the day, because this patient could have easily got a stent with catastrophic results, and we've prevented the patient from having such a treatment. Thank you.
So one thing, and what stabilized gas, particularly many centers US I've seen, the perfluorocarbon is used, but in our country, the agitating saline is contrast media used. What contrast gas or the reagent you can use for the contrast echo in your lab?
Okay, so the 3 agents available in the market today, and in India, you've got 2 agents. One is Sonoview, which contains sulfur hexafluoride gas surrounded by a shell, which is lipid-based. And there's another one which India has called Definity, which has got perfluorocarbon as a gas, yes, and surrounded by also lipid-based, just like Sonoview. So you've got 2 agents, and the agent that we use in this particular case is actually Definity or Luminity.
Apart other use of the contrast echo after particularly ischemic background, marked infarction background, aneurysm, the ventricular aneurysm, ruptures, VSD, okay, so many other mechanical complications can be diagnosed.
Yes.
But this is very important, this is very useful. You have already mentioned the segmental wall motions and myocardial perfusion. Contrast imaging has been new things done by you, which is also already established by you also. But stunned myocardium, hibernating myocardium can also differentiated by your contrast is also. Yeah. Any question, Dr. Hajra? Any others?
Yeah, nice talk. Kashinath or me, sir?
Because yeah, anyone you, both Hajra.
Okay, it's a nice talk, Roxy, as usual. But that doesn't tell us whether you need to put a stent by having tissue perfusions. It does not localize the territory. And what is your validation process? I mean, what is your gold standard? Is it MRI or is it physiology to put a stent or not to put a stent in INOCAS and MINOCAS? There are so many varieties now.
No, absolutely. So if you look at this particular case, right, it is localized. The myocardial bridge was present exactly in the area where there was wall motion abnormality, subtending the myocardium at the site of the vascular territory. So it was coinciding very well that, it could likely to be myocardial bridging causing the whole problem. But the crux of the matter is there's no ischemia in this patient. So obviously the perfusion is not the problem here. The problem is the myocardium itself. So this could be myocarditis. The patient may have present with a strange myocarditis where it's localized to the apex. But the fact that the perfusion is completely normal in a patient presenting the way the patient did acutely suggests very much like it's a Takotsubo syndrome, because this patient was actually followed up. I didn't show the result. The myocardium is completely normal now. The ejection fraction is normalized. There are no changes. So yes, we could have done an MRI, but I don't think the MRI would have given us any more information because the patient was stable, and we are not going to do anything, even if it's myocarditis. We are not going to do anything more but give the patient ACE inhibitors, beta blockers for recovery of function. So ultimately the function recovered. And then we had a series of patients actually like this, and that's how we published the paper.
So Dr. Roxy, in my experience in cases of management of role of intervention cardiology, particularly putting the stain at the mitral bridge, I have done the 2 cases. One case is really, after 3 years, fracture of the stent happened because of which is already described. Another person still doing well. Right. And of course, sometimes the ventricular, he presented with VT sometimes, yes, but antiarrhythmic drug is 5-year follow-up is doing well. But my basic question, you told me proximal to the mitral bridge, atherosclerotic happen. Similarly, yes, just like the coarctation, proximal to the coarctation, the atherosclerosis, why it is happening in the proximal part?
Well, I think it's more to do with the turbulent flow, isn't it? The way the blood flows into that myocardial bridge, it creates, so as the blood flows and there's a narrowing, it creates a turbulence around just above the area of narrowing. And that causes a Venturi effect and affects the wall of the artery. And when the wall of the artery is affected, obviously there is a presence of platelets and white blood cell accumulation, giving rise to atherosclerosis.
But the reversely, in case of the bicuspid valve, when the obstruction aortic valve, yes, and this aneurysm have distal to the valve because Venturi effect. Why the distally that time?
Well, the phenomenon is different because there is already aortopathy. Most of these patients have underlying aortopathy. So it's nothing to do with the narrowing of the valve, but it's an independent to the narrowing of the valve, the aortopathy exists.
Histological changes and all this.
That's right. So even without any stenosis, you can see the aorta dilating actually.
Only one question, please. In this COVID era, have you encountered similar myocarditis or similar ischemic syndromes like this one in this COVID era?
No, okay. We've got we've done echoes on about 360 patients with COVID in the intensive care and acutely, and the incidence of myocarditis is rather low. It is there, but it is very low. It would be like maybe out of 360 patients, there may be about 7 or 8 patients who had myocardial dysfunction, and the myocardial dysfunction in 2 cases were due to coronary disease. They had clear-cut wall motion and they went to cath lab, they had coronary disease. But there were 3 or 4 patients who did show myocardial dysfunction, which did not have, the coronary arterography was normal completely. So those patients is likely to have myocarditis and they were followed up subsequently. But it's not a very widespread phenomenon.
Soumitra here, Roxy.
Hi, Soumitra.
After a long time. Yeah. After a long time. Is there any experimental role of localized myotomy if there is a significant muscle breach causing significant ischemia? Instead of stenting, because there is always chance of stent fracture and non-expansion.
Yeah, so you're talking about surgery really, and cutting off the muscle above and below. I'm not sure about that because there are no real case reports that are done, or there's no series actually addressing that. I think the 2 things that we came across as far as intervention is concerned is one is putting a stent, the other is actually bypassing with a Lima or something. But I don't think anybody attempted a myocardial, cutting the myocardium. So I'm not aware. I don't know whether others are aware.
Can I have a question here to see, Roxy, is it possible that these patients will benefit by beta blockers? Because by reducing their main problem is when there is a tachycardia, the systolic compression becomes more and more and they become symptomatic. And beta blockers can always look after these patients because they don't allow the tachycardia to happen.
Yeah, so the patient was put on beta blocker for that reason itself, and also because the patient had LV dysfunction. So the patient was on ACS treatment. So, aspirin, clopidogrel, beta blocker, ACE inhibitors, the patient was on all of that. Yeah, so beta blocker was put for 2 reasons. 1, because the patient had LV dysfunction, and 2, because we wanted to prevent tachycardia. At that time, and also, incidentally, this patient had Takotsubo. So beta blockers also work with Takotsubo because you reduce the bombardment of the myocardium with catecholamines.
In case of myocardial bridge, and the diltiazem particularly is also very useful addition to the beta blocker, alternative to beta blocker. Okay, yeah. Dr. Akshay, for excellent presentation. Nice meeting to you once again. By virtually, of course, we are very benefited by your knowledge.
Yeah, no, I always enjoy these meetings and enjoy talking to all of you.
Okay, thank you very much once again. So next speaker, one of our old friend, of course, Chandrasekharan from USA. He'll talk on interpretive role of 3D in case of severe hypotensive patient. Chandrasekharan, and he's now the associate editor of the JACC. And apart from these routine activities, he's spending enough time and particularly editorial board of the JACC. Dr. Chandrasekharan, please.
Well, I think I'd like to correct the last statement, sir. I'm not the editor, that is Y. Chandrasekhar.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm Y. Chandrasekhar. But I think I do.
Yes, that's right.
I am in the part of the editorial board, but not the editor. But anyway.
No, I know it. Yeah. Valen Pushkar is the editor. You are the editor board. You are enough role in the editor board. Of that thing I mean to say. Valentin Pushkar is the editor at present. I know it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
I think the topic is how does the TEE in a patient with the hypotension during surgery. Before that, I just want to take a minute to clarify a few things regarding the previous case, which Roxy was addressing nicely. There's a lot of data where myocardial bridging has been unroofed in the olden days by the surgeons, and it has not resulted any benefit. So they stopped doing it. Then second thing is the question about atherosclerosis in an adjoining area. That's because one is the epicardial artery that dips into the myocardium. So the transmural forces are quite different. So they're subjected to a lot of wear and tear. And as Roxy pointed out, atherosclerosis does develop. Not only that, they also do develop spasm. So once this occurs, it becomes very difficult to mitigate. And people have, what they have done was unroofing and doing a bypass completely along the vessel. That has been done, taking a mammary as a roof, putting it for the LAD around the area rather than unroofing it. Unroofing it doesn't help at all. So in a very intractable patient where ischemia has been documented that my bridging is causing, people have done that. Well, having said that, I think I just wanted to go over a few cases where hypotension can occur during surgery. I think we need to know whether it is pre-surgery or pre-bypass or during or post-bypass. That becomes very important because, and also we need to know what type of surgery they're undergoing. So if you're in a busy surgical center where they do so many intraoperative procedures, TEEs, pre and post, we have to have a clear idea what patients whom we have to take a good look before the surgeon can start and whom you can just be there cursory. In our center, even bypass surgery, we do a TEE because the patients come from outside. They would have not had a complete evaluation at Mayo. So some of them we have found out LA myxoma, some of them we have found out ASDs, incidental ASDs and things like that. So correctable lesions we do find in about 4 to 5% of the patients. So we do routine TEs. But on the other hand, that also takes a lot of demand on you on how much you can focus. Here is a patient who is undergoing bypass surgery, history of hypertension, EF around 55%, triple vessel disease. So it's a routine bypass, which probably you're not going to expect much, and he's been evaluated at Mayo itself. So I never thought that he's going to have any problem at all. So while I was in the other room, suddenly the anesthesiologist calls and says that, Dr. Chandra, can you come in here because our patient is dropping his blood pressure. So I go there. This is his recordings here. You can see that when the anesthesia was started and when they're trying to procure the vein grafts on the leg, I think it was fine. As they're going along, suddenly it dips, strongly dips, and hypotension, increase in the entitled CO2.
Chandra, please share your screen. Sir, please share your screen.
Yeah, okay. I'm sorry. Oh, boy, I made a big mistake. Okay. I think, let me go back here. Share screen.
Your description is so good, so vivid that we didn't need to see the images actually.
Anyway, let me pull it up for the. Well, I think it is.
Okay.
One, I don't know what I did. Just hold on for 1 second.
You need to go to slideshow. Below, if you go down, there's an icon there.
Here.
Listen.
Okay.
Okay, very good. Now we are back. Okay, very good. I'm sorry.
No.
Well, anyway, if you look at it here, the blood pressure was 64, 112 over 64, and the heart rate was 80. Everything was pretty good as they've induced, and the sternotomy was going on, but leg vein procurement is also going on. Suddenly, there's a problem. Patient slowly started going, blood pressure started going up, then suddenly it drops, and finally drops. This is the time the anesthesiologist was using medications like phenylephrine and other things to jack up the pressure, thinking that it is him and whatnot with anesthetic drug. But he didn't realize that we have the probe and you could just look into the LV and see what is going on, whatnot. But suddenly he called. So when I went there, first thing that struck me was, why does this entitled CO2 is very high and he's also becoming hypoxic? Then I immediately took a look at the echo. The first view, here you have a transesophageal, mid-esophageal view, short axis, aorta, right atrium, left atrium. This should be the area of main pulmonary artery. This is the left atrial appendage. So you're not able to see the main pulmonary artery at all. Then I was wondering, then I was asking the surgeons, what are you guys doing? Then the surgical tech who was procuring the vein graft, he was using so there they use a CO2 laser. So in order to have a minimally invasive, they make a hole and pass the CO2 laser probe all the way down the saphenous vein as the CO2 is being insufflated into the interspace, and they cut the vein and pull the vein out. So the tributaries are left open. So when you inject the CO2 at a high intense pressure in order to keep the interface open enough for you to see and cut it, so that for the laser, they can be aspirated also. If the ventricular function and the cardiac hemodynamics are good, they can be sucked in. So this must have been going on for 10 or 15 minutes. So the large bubbles were there. Then I told them, listen guys, are you guys, first initially when I saw this, I thought whether they're by mistake, they're giving him IV, there's some open communication somewhere, the air is entering, or they're giving large volume of bolus of fluid that's causing this. But then finally, when I looked at the surgical tech, then I asked him, what are you trying to do? Then he told me this. Then we figured out this. Then he stopped that. And we gave him high dose oxygen, was put on 100% oxygen. He was ventilated continuously. And slowly the pressure started improving. Here is the same view, long axis view of the aorta, right pulmonary artery you are seeing here, left atrium. See the bubbles, marked bubbles fully. So CO2, which is like an air embolism, massive air embolism or massive CO2 embolism has occurred in this patient during venous procurement. Now, after they stopped it, slowly, this is the RV outflow tract view, where you can see the left atrium, aortic valve, left ventricle part of the left ventricular outflow tract, right ventricular outflow tract, RV, and main pulmonary artery. So main pulmonary artery, you can see the bubbles, still the large coagulated bubbles. They're all improving gradually. So as the time went on over a period of 10 minutes, nothing was being done. Exactly, it was stopped, and 100% oxygen was being given, and is being ventilated. So slowly things started improving, and the hemodynamics returned to normal. So the CO2 embolism, in our country, we don't use the CO2 laser that commonly everywhere, but we do see air, intracardiac air, during the patient coming off of pump, especially when they're doing the on pump, you do see it. And sometimes they get into the ventricle, they also get into the myocardium, and slowly when they allow the cardiac output to improve, it gradually gets better. The CO2 embolism commonly causes significant hypotension, decrease the cardiac output. And there's a large paper which was done, and this is our patient. After some time, everything dissolved completely. So this is an article done by Dr. Lin. It says numerous case reports have been written, but he looked at a series of 443 patients, 33 patients. 17% is the incidence of CO2 emboli using this laser, and severe occurred only in less than 1% of the patients. Majority of them, if we wait, maintain the cardiac output, they improve. I think I just wanted to go over the next case. The 68-year-old male, bicuspid aortic valve with aortopathy and severe AR undergoing AVR and ascending aortic aortopathy scheduled. So here is the initial picture, transthoracic, aorta is dilated and LV function is okay, and I'm not showing the color here. Here is the transesophageal intraoperative view, the bicuspid aortic valve with a little bit of a Lambel's excrescence and degenerative stance. And you see the LA aortic root. And you can see the bicuspid valve where the right and the left cusp are fused. And here is the severe AR. So this patient undergoes surgery. The surgeon replaced the aortic valve, but he thought that ascending aorta, even though it was about 5.9, he thought that he'll do aortoplasty. So he cut the aorta and sutured it together. And then when they're coming out, the outline shows blood pressure only 70 millimeters. So he was worried. And visually, when he looked at it, LV and RV are contracting very well. And the LV and RV function looked pretty good. So they were wondering why is this hypotension. And I told him, listen, it's very easy for you. Put in a needle and measure the pressure, and you will find out it's not going to be the same, but let's look at what did he do. So when he said, well, I think the result is coming out, we're not going to do that. I said, okay, let's take a look. So when I tried to take a look, ascending aorta was significantly constricted here. I couldn't see anything more. The valve cusps are opening very well. Then we tried to do a gradient and shows a significant gradient. At that, it's like he caused ascending aortic constriction now. So I pointed out to him that I think you have a gradient of 100 millimeters of mercury. The mid-ascending aorta, and no wonder why the blood pressure is low. So probably what you have to do is you have to redo this. And he went back there and he put a conduit, which he could have done earlier and it could have come off. So I think here is the conduit. Now you can see the conduit nicely, and the valve is opening very well, and the gradients are normal gradients. It's about 10 millimeters of mercury across the site. Now, I think the take-home points in the intraoperative cases are, we need to know what the surgeon is going to do regarding the case, so that we'll have a clear idea when they get into mess, what are the possible things, what we need to look at, because we don't have too much time. And similarly, when you're looking for anything, even otherwise, but when you're doing a basic exam, do some comprehensive exam, looking what he's going to do, how he's going to do, what are the things that you need to look at, so that you will have a checklist in your own mind, so that when they call for you, then you are not caught with off guard, and you can be prepared and you can focus on. Thank you.
Thank you, Subramanian. Excellent presentation and nice case. Dr. Hajra, Dr. P.K. Hajra.
Yeah, sir, very simple thing. When you do LVAD and we do CO2, we make a tender-like position where then your head is down and leg is up. And when you do this kind of thing in the surgical table, your leg should be up and head should be down. That's a very simple thing to avoid this kind of complications. And thank God he did not have any PFO. He would have had multiple stroke by the time you are called in. A nice case, sir. Very, very, very learning case.
This case actually, Trendelenburg position would not have helped, because this is the venous procurement. So here they are procuring the vein from the leg, from the great saphenous vein, thigh, as well as from the proximal leg. So the laser catheter is like a tube which is being introduced. You can't do it. And what they could have done is they could have positioned the table, but nevertheless, the important thing is the amount of volume that has gone in, no matter how much Trendelenburg you put in, it's not going to go. It has gone into the pulmonary system completely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But another important things in the, particularly the anesthetist should be very quite enough, having the knowledge in cases of diabetic. Some patients, if the diabetic and anesthetized, their pressure develop hypotension critically, because the cardiac neuropathy develop and the reflexes are blunted. That's the important keep in mind.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Dr. Kashinath Hajra.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Sir.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Nice.
All the speakers done well, and everybody is finished in time. And I am intervention cardiology, so definitely have greater knowledge of your echocardiography, which is very useful for our day-to-day activity in intervention procedure. Thank you very much, and thank you very much once again.
Thank you, esteemed speakers and the chairpersons.